Chelsea Handler, and this is my house. Come on
in. Years ago,
so I've lived here since
people asked me,
is what I've been told.
why, Nina, are you studying skin? Most anthropologists, most paleoanthropologists study bones or fossils or the genetics of humans, but they don't try to understand aspects of human evolution by looking at skin. First of all, skin isn't preserved in the fossil record, so there are some real shortcomings if you're trying to study the physical remains of skin. But I realized that by overlooking skin, we overlooked probably one of the most important parts of the human body: our physical interface with the environment, our protection, our organ of thermoregulation, and our organ of communication via touch and body decoration. By missing out on skin, we missed out on a big part of the study of human evolution. And so, despite the obstacles, I have enjoyed studying the evolution of human skin, and I'm going to share with you over the next few days a little bit of that journey. Today, talking about general aspects of the evolution of human skin, how we came to have naked, potentially sweaty, and extremely colorful skin, and then tomorrow about what skin color means to all of us in terms of our health and our social relationships over centuries and millennia. In 2005, colleagues began to take a little bit more notice of skin. In 2005, the genome of the chimpanzee was published, and everyone looked at this paper with great anticipation, because they expected, certainly when we compare the genomes of humans and modern chimps, what we would see are enormous differences in genes dictating the differentiation of the brain or the musculoskeletal system. What was revealed was a surprise to many, but not to me, because the major set of loci that turned out to be under most rapid evolution in the human genome was that governing the differentiation of the
this
human
for a long time
epidermis.
I thought was a bunch of people on a ski
in other
slope,
words,
and
it was our
about 2
skin
years in after having this, somebody said, "Oh my God, I've been to that beach."
Differentiating
and I thought,
part
what?
of our genome.
And then I looked and realized everyone's in a bathing suit, and indeed it is a beach, and it's not a ski mountain. So once again, I have things in my house that I know nothing about. Okay, so this couch is Barroso. It's called the Gentry sofa, and I bought this myself in a store. I went in, sat on it, and I was like, I need this. And it's got this cool red stitching, and it's the most comfortable
we have to
sofa
compensate
that I've ever sat
in
on. I have
various
this beautiful
ingenious
chandelier
biological
because
ways.
I like to think of my house as
I'll
more soft contemporary.
elaborate
because
on in the next few
kind
minutes.
of softer than it's not stark.
This really
but I like
got
features
people
like this because
thinking
it does
about the
kind of soften
evolution
up
of
and
skin
makes
in
it
a much more
bit more
serious way.
whimsical. This
And I
somebody
must
got
say,
me this.
in
A
the
lot of the
last
hot
12
stuff
years
in my
since
house
the
are
chimp
gifts.
genome was
And,
published,
you know,
there has
obviously
been
that
a
means
greater
lot to me because I'm a
swell of
friendship kind
interest in
person.
the
This must
evolution
have
of
been when I
skin.
was going through my topless phase, which I'm kind of still going through.
One of my favorite visuals is what I call the hairy timeline of human evolution, where we have here at the back end, around 7.5 million years ago, when we last shared a common ancestor with our closest relative, chimpanzees. And our skin, if we could look at it back then, we reconstruct it to be mostly lightly pigmented and covered with dark hair, that of a chimpanzee today. But through time, and critically just around 2 million years ago, we see important changes. And I want to focus on those changes because this is when we really see the transition to what we would call ostensibly modern skin, mostly naked and sweaty and colorful. And it's about this time, around 2 million years ago, and here represented by this impeccable partial skeleton from Kenya, we find an early member of the genus Homo, a beautiful skeleton representing one of our ancient ancestors. What's important for you here is that this individual, a young man, has very modern body proportions, quite different from that of the Australopithecine ancestors from previous millions of years. And the lifestyle of this hominin is what sets him apart and what sets the genus Homo apart, because it is these long legs, the broad pelvis, the relatively short arms that indicate that this is a person with a modern build, a strider, potentially a runner, and very different from any kind of slightly more hesitant biped or more arboreally competent biped that existed previously. We reconstructed the skin of this individual to be really mostly naked and darkly pigmented. But here, what I want to talk about is why do we reconstruct this as mostly naked skin at this time? There are lots of primates that live in East Africa and other hot environments that run around a lot, that have lots of hair. Why did we lose most of our body hair? We know from studying human physiology, as well as the physiology of lots of mammals, that basically having hair is great protection against abrasion, great insulation, physical insulation against cold and temperature fluctuations, but it physically impedes the process of the evaporation of sweat. So even in those mammals that can produce sweat on their surface, if they sweat into the fur and the fur gets wet, their skin cannot actually become cool. In other words, the purpose of sweating, which is evaporative cooling, is lost. What happens if you belong to a lineage like primates, where most excess body heat is lost through the skin? Here are our buddies that have a lot of hair, that run around a lot. A beautiful antelope on the right, a domestic dog on the left. They liberate excess body heat in a very different way. The carnivore on the left here is able to pant. The beautiful antelope on the right here has a wonderful big nose with lots of veins, and the inspired air that gets brought in through the wet nasal mucosa cools the veins that drain back to the proximity of the brain and help to locally cool the brain. So both of these animals can get quite hot, but they have local cooling mechanisms in their head that help their brains to stay cool when they're exerting themselves, especially in a hot environment. You would think that our primate cousins, our hairy primate cousins, would do similar, but even in this long-faced baboon, we don't have any structures similar to those that we find in hooved mammals or in the panting respiration of dogs. Instead, even our close relative, the baboon, and chimpanzees for that matter, have to lose heat from their body surface through radiant cooling, through radiant heat loss and evaporation. So they lack these specialized methods of cooling. When a baboon runs full pelt for a long distance, it overheats and it stops. In the evolution of the genus Homo, we find the evolution of a primate that is walking and running and foraging and escaping from predators and possibly hunting and needing to be able to sustain energetic locomotion for a long period of time. There was natural selection at this time for the loss of body hair in order to facilitate evaporative cooling. So we hypothesized years ago that the loss of functional body hair was related to the needs of thermoregulation. So here we have this beautiful, young, early member of the genus Homo with mostly functionally naked skin. And where did the sweat glands come from? We know that in most mammals, sweat glands of the kind that we have all over our body are found only on the surfaces of the palms and the soles of the feet. So how did human primates manage to get all of these sweat glands all over the place? This has been a question that has pressed people for decades. We didn't lose all of our hair, rather we reduced the size of the body hair so that when you look at your own body hair, it's this little sort of measly little things coming out of hair follicles. The hair follicles are enormously important, but where did the sweat glands come from? And this, as I say, was an unanswered question for years, until literally just a few months ago when my colleague Elaine Fuchs and her postdoc, Catherine Liu, published a beautiful paper in Science about how this differentiation occurs in early human development. Long story short, what happens is that there is an important bone morphogenetic protein, BMP, that determines where these hair follicles and sweat glands are going to be differentiated on the surface of the body. And then at a very critical time in embryonic development, there is a little tilt toward BMP in differentiating toward sweat gland development as opposed to hair follicles. So what could have been a terminal hair, like in other primates, becomes a sweat gland instead. A beautiful piece of evolutionary developmental biological regulation. And voila, sweat glands all over. What do we do with that naked skin? Well, we sweat a lot, yes, but it's really important to recognize that in our repertoire of behaviors as primates, we engage in lavish amounts of meaningful touch. Although we don't engage in it so much these days except with our smartphones, gaining or touching one another has been an important part of our communication repertoire for millions of years, long before we existed as a human lineage. But with hairless skin, the surface area for this communication has become ever much larger. This surface of communication is an important portal for social bonding in early human development and continues to be very important throughout our ontogeny and throughout our lives. So even though we legislate against touch in many workplaces and look down upon it, it is an essential part of the human communications repertoire. And we know now that withholding touch from infants, withholding affectionate touch, actually stifles infant growth, not just emotional growth, but physical growth. And so infant massage and affiliative touch are now championed not only for infants, but for people throughout the life course.
I'm very passionate about ice. I think it's an international issue.
But the loss of hair had many other consequences.
No one ever will. I've probably redone my pool 3 times because I don't like that iridescent finish. I like the matte finish, but the matte finish is incredibly hard to maintain. I will probably redo this pool again, but I mean, it's a whole fiasco every time I do it. And this was Esther Williams' house, who was an Olympic swimmer. And then there's a little hillside. If you take the steps up, you can kind of go up there and you get a nice little view from the top. And I had a treadmill up there for about 6 months and then it stopped working. So they told me not to have treadmills outside, even in California. This furniture has yet to be updated to match the rest because I just had the decks stain this color to match the rest of the edifice of the house. So we're waiting to redo those. But this is a nice little congregation area too. We designed the chocolate top of that chimney to match the rest of the house and pull everything in. I like these warm colors and I like the warm vibes. So, yeah, that's pretty much what this is. It's just another little area. As you can see, there's lots of little areas. For the hillside I moved in, it was just it was really nothing. I mean, there was not a lot of planting done, and I just thought it was a huge opportunity to have like a moving, kind of like a magic carpet. And that's how I described it to my landscaper. I was like, I just want it to be colorful and be lush.
We have traces of pieces of ochre dated from about 70,000 years ago from South Africa. We have other pieces of pigment from elsewhere in the world, very ancient, some 50 to 25,000 years old. I would guess that these pieces of ochre, at least some of them, were used to decorate human bodies. And that even before that, humans who had